Welcome back to the Art of Boat Building. In today's episode, we're going to sand the hull and get it prepared for either varnish and or paint. Now, in order to do this, we've already done a fill coat on the entire boat, and the fill coat is what you do after you've got the fiberglass on there. You put a fill coat that is a sandable coat. Now, I use two different techniques to do that. In episode 8, you'll see how I did the hull, and I used a roller, and I did that so that as it was setting up, so I was able to do it while the epoxy was still curing. The deck I did a little bit differently. I did it with a brush, and you get a much heavier fill coat that way. Now, why I was able to do that on the deck is because it was pretty much flat. The hull not being flat, then a heavy fill coat would tend to run and get runs off of it. So that's why I used a roller on the deck. Now, some important things that we'll have to pay attention to as we're working on this is this transition here where the fiberglass wraps around onto the hull. And I can actually feel that little layer of fiberglass there. So I'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to it. Now, I've already sanded the entire inside of the in the cockpit here and it's ready for its final finishes. Now, it's my intention to paint the inside of the cockpit and also to paint the hull. And I'm going to do that because this is a personal preference. I'm not necessarily as interested. I don't think it's as interesting when it's a plywood hull in big sheets like that. Now, of course, this is plywood also, but it's a much prettier wood, and the little bit of okumi plywood here on the sides I think is a nice accent. So, first thing I want to do is show you some of the tools that we're going to be working with. So what I've got out here are a few tools. Now, one of the things, and you've probably seen me using these sanding pads earlier. So essentially we're going to go through a 3-step sanding, starting with 80, then to 120, and then we're going to use 220. Now, how I make these, they're just simply pieces of styrofoam insulation, and I use this particular brand of sandpaper, which is adhesive. These are made by Porter Cable, and I will leave a link to them in the video description. So what I do is I just put this pad on there and fold it up and then trim it off. So it gives me a nice flat surface. Now, what's nice about these is they will contour a little bit where there's some softer edges on the boat. And then I always keep this labeled so that it's real easy to be able to tell what grit those are. Now, some of the other things I'm going to do here, I'm going to use this longboard, and I have 80 grit sandpaper on here. Now, this is a longboard that I made, and I'll leave a description of a link to my making this in this link here that you can see in the upper right hand corner. What's nice about it is it's a little bit flexible, so it'll contour to the hull nicely. Now, the other thing is I have a piece of plywood here that I have put some of the adhesive sandpaper on there that's nice and flat, and you'll see that becomes very important, especially when we're trying to sand out drips or runs or things like that. And then finally, I do have a mechanical sander here. I typically don't prefer to do this, but I'm going to do a little bit because I know many of you would rather use a machine than to do it by hand. So the first thing I'm going to do is to flip the hull up and work here on the port side of the hull. So I'll get it positioned here There we go. Now you can see here where some drips had come around to the bottom of the hull here, mostly when I was doing that top side fill coat. So I need to sand these drips out first. I'm going to stop right here. It's pretty smooth. Now you can see the shiny parts here, which I can just barely feel. They look deeper than they actually are. But I'm going to stop at this point because up in here I can see just the beginning of the weave of the fiberglass. So this is a good example of where we need to maybe come back and put a little bit more epoxy in to get a better, more of a fill coat across there. Well, that feels pretty good. Now, I do know that I'm going to have to put another fill coat on the hull. So as long as it's, I can barely feel that drip in there now, and a fill coat's going to take care of that. And once again, I can see how I'm getting pretty close to the weave up here. So I'm going to continue to sand, and like I said, I'm going to work on the drips first, and then some of these areas where there are very little drips, I'll go over that lightly to kind of even it out a little bit. So I've been sanding along. I sanded the big drips with that hard piece of plywood with the sandpaper on it. Now, areas where there are hardly any drips at all, I'm using the palm sander. Now let me show you a couple of things that are important if you use a mechanical sander. Now I've got 80 grit on here, and the important thing with a sander like this is to let the flatness of the sander lay on the hull and not to get impatient and tip it up and use the toe of the sander to sand and try to get a little more aggressive with it. By keeping it flat like this and also not bearing down on it, let the machine do the work. It may take a little longer, but that's really the best way to do it. So let me turn this on and do a little bit and show you. So you can see what I was doing is I was keeping the sander moving up and down and back and forth. Now, as soon as you see, if you see any weave popping through, stop. Don't go any more. And I can see just a little spot right here of the weave showing right there. So what that tells me is don't sand here anymore and to get a fill coat on it. Now, the other thing that we want to do is to not sand right up to the edge, which you can see over here where I did that. It did not sand up to the edge, and that is important. Is that focused? Is I did not sand up to the edge, and that you should do by hand because I can actually almost feel the weave when I run my finger across it. So just a little light sanding on there. Let me show you with if I just take a sand block and just do a little bit, that's all you need to do there. And then get a fill coat on there. So you can see here that I have not sanded into the chine. You can see it's still shining, so I'll do that by hand. Now the other thing that I need to pay attention to is down here where the hull fabric wraps around onto, or I'm sorry, the deck fabric wraps around onto the hull. So what I want to do is I want to blend this so that it has a nice smooth transition. Right now I can feel like basically the thickness of the fiberglass. Now in this case, it's okay if I sand into this top fiberglass a little bit so that I kind of feather it into the hull. And you can see down here where I've already done that, where it's nice and smooth. So I don't do this with a machine. Again, I do it by hand because you have much better control. So you can see if I just go along here, now what I need to do is be very careful not to sand too much out here on the edge. So I'm kind of angling in a little bit. A nice smooth transition. So again, I'm being very careful not to hit out here on the shear. If I zoom in here, you can see this is perfectly smooth. When I run my finger across it, I cannot feel that overlap at all. So little spots like this, we'll dull down with a Scotch-Brite and it'll just get some more fill coat over it. Well, that's it for the port side here. It feels very smooth. I'm pretty happy with it. So it will be ready for going over with a Scotch-Brite and then get ready for the fill coat, another fill coat on there. And you see I was using my little sanding block because especially in here where there's a little flare, it was really easy to be able to get into that sort of concave shape in there. So anyway, it also just sort of evens everything out quite nicely. So I will now get the starboard side all sanded, and then the next step will be mixing up some epoxy. Well, now that I've got the main panels of the hull all sanded, you can see where I did not touch where the keel or the chime or the shear is. if you're using a mechanical sander, you'll very quickly burn through that fiberglass. And also you could round over the edge of this, which is not going to be ideal. So what I'm going to do now is just take my hand sander and just kind of go over it a little bit, very carefully, so that I don't take any more than necessary off. And all I really want to do is dull down the shine. So you can see this doesn't take very much at all to do that. And you may be wondering, I'm like, well, I can see little shiny bits in there, and I'll show you what we're going to do next after I get these spots sanded. So now I've got all these seams sanded. The next step is to go over it with a Scotch-Brite, and that will dull down any little shiny spots without damaging the weave at all. So I want to go over the entire boat with this, not just on that spot. And that way I know all of the little shiny spots have got a little tooth to it, so that when we put the next fill coat on it, it will mechanically bond to this existing coat. So the next thing I'm going to do here is I'm going to take some tape and go right along the shear, and I'm finding that joint where the deck meets the hull is where I'm putting this. And what this will do is create a little dam, kind of fold it under here like this. I can do it. I'll create a little dam so that if there is a drip, it won't run onto the hull, or I mean onto the deck. So the next step here is to wipe the hull down with some denatured alcohol so we know that it's nice and clean. Let me get a little epoxy mixed up here. First, I'm going to mix about 12 ounces or so. I think that should be about the right amount. So I like these cups where it has a 2-to-1 that you can measure the amounts by volume. It's a little faster than pumps when I'm mixing up a large amount. So up to the 2 mark for the resin, and then the 2 mark for the hardener. And give that a stir. It's really warm here today. Looks like it's about 88 degrees. So I'm going to need to keep moving pretty quickly so that the epoxy doesn't go off on me before I get done. As before, I'm using a foam roller and a tray. Now, one of the things about warm temperatures and epoxy, the sooner you get it out of the volume of the cup and into a tray where it's got more surface area and it's not as thick, then it won't set up quite as quickly. Okay, that looks pretty good. We'll get it in the tray and we'll get it some on the boat. Now, why I'm using this roller method here is that I can get a thin coat on there, and it's early enough in the day that I should be able to get a second coat on it so that it can chemically bond as long as the epoxy hasn't completely gone off. That it gets to the point where it's what we call, can use a method called the cotton ball test. And basically it's when you've got the epoxy and it's getting sticky. If you touch it with a cotton ball and it sticks, then it's not ready. But if you touch it with a cotton ball and it doesn't stick, then you can start to recoat it. So these little 1/4-inch rollers do a very nice job of applying it in a nice, even, thin layer. As I'm doing this, you can see that I'm going one direction and then the opposite, and that's what really gives it a better coverage than just going one direction like this. So once you get a direction on there like that, then it's good to come back and go the other way as well. I can see on there where I put that first load down from my roller being loaded that it's really heavy right in that spot. So I can kind of go over and pull it back and forth and get it leveled out nicely. That's really our goal at this point, is to get many nice thin coats as opposed to one heavy one. And it should make the next sanding go easier. I'm trying to work fairly quickly here. I can actually feel the epoxy warming up in the tray right now, so I'm not too far from it going off to the point where it won't be usable. It looks like I'm going to make it to the end here. Oh, I kind of look over it and I can see a little reflection. I can find spots that look just a little bit starved. Come back and hit them. And kind of inspect it. So Also looking for any sags or runs in here. Just a little bit there. So many people ask me, well, how much epoxy do I need to mix up? So I think what I said earlier was that I was mixing, let's see what that was. It was about 10 ounces. So what I'm going to do is take what's remaining in my tray and put it back in the cup and just see what, so it looks like what I didn't use was probably about 2 ounces. So basically, I used about 8 ounces on the hull. So I will probably mix up the same amount next time, just because it's always better to have a little extra than not enough. So I'll give it one last little inspection here, and we will let this set up and come back in a couple of hours and get another fill coat on there. It's been 2 hours since I finished, and so if I touch it, it does not stick at all. So it's all ready to go for another coat. This epoxy is just about ready to go off on me. Yep, there it goes. So that will be the last of it. To get it on there, and fortunately, I was able to get all of it. That spot where it is went off on me, I'll have to sand quite a bit. But boy, when it goes, it goes. In fact, it's even smoking just a little bit. Anyway, that is our second fill coat, and that will all cure. And then when it's all cured, we can give it its final sanding and get ready for some finishes. So, as always, thanks for watching. And remember, if you're going to make it beautiful.